If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. Today we have author and movie producer Tananarive Due. Kat, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I just got back from Gen Con, and that was just a blast.
Ooh. Yeah. I say this every year. I always want to go to Gen Con, and I never freaking make it. Someday.
Well, you should. I mean, they've got a really nice writers symposium and a lot of really interesting writers, and it was awesome. And Linda Addison was our guest of honor, and she is just smart and amazing and dresses like a queen, and she was so cool. Yeah.
I think she was guest of honor when I went to StokerCon last year, I believe.
Yeah.
And you've been wanting to get her onto the podcast, I believe. So we'll have to do that.
Yes, I would. When I think people are cool, I try and get them on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Because that way I can schmooze with them.
Hell yeah. Cannot argue with that at all. Speaking of guest of honor, I was at Confluence a couple weeks ago, and you're the guest of honor next year.
I am. It is finally okay to announce that. I'm so excited. And a lot of people that I know there, and it's within driving distance, which is nice. And I'm just really looking forward to it. It's always a huge surprise when somebody says, come be a guest of honor, but just absolutely delightful. Absolutely delightful.
Yeah. I forget who I was talking to, but they were like, yeah, we asked Kat to be guest of honor, and it was like the fastest response we've ever had. Within like a half an hour, she was like, yeah, I'll do it.
Do you think I should start holding out? Be like, well, I don't know.
Let me think. I'm very busy that weekend. Maybe I can fit you in.
No, I love cons, and I love going to talk to people, and so I'm always gonna say yes if I can make it.
It's awesome. So before we get started, just a couple business items. Number one, my good mic broke yesterday. I was doing the introduction for one of our column episodes, and I'm like, the sounds really weird on here. And so I looked at the microphone, and it wasn't working. And I pulled out the wire, and the whole input came out. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, that was awesome surprise. So I'm using my backup mic today. Hopefully, after editing and everything, it'll sound fine. But that's where I am audio-wise. Also, we are going to be having a new logo soon, everybody out there.
Yay!
It's going to be very cool. It is so awesome. And we actually have two versions of the new logo because all of us on the podcast couldn't agree which color mix we liked. So I was just like,
no, you should phrase that differently. Don't say we couldn't agree. Say something like, we were so stoked by all of them that we could not choose between them.
There you go. We were so stoked by all the different versions, all the different color schemes of the new logo that we were just like, I told our artist, I'll just pay for both of them then,
Yeah.
And they're awesome and can't wait to get them out there and have everybody see those. That should be coming soon. We're also trying to put together, updates our website a little bit because our website's getting like really out of date. So I'm trying to fix that up. I'm working with Diane on that too. So I don't know when I'm going to squeeze that in between other things, but I'm trying.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think that's all. I guess we should get Tananarive on, huh?
We should.
Awesome. Okay, everybody.
Do it.
We will be right back with Tananarive Due.
Join a house. Right. And fight the undead horde.
Incoming horde at 11 o'clock.
Sorry, JC, we've got company. Gotta go. Contact! Game of Tones. Make writing an adventure. Join us for November. More information at gameoftones.org.
Okay, and we are back. Today we have Tananarive Due, an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She is an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband / collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone on Paramount Plus, and 2 segments of Shudder's anthology film, Horror Noir. They also created their upcoming Black horror graphic novel, The Keeper, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. Due and Barnes co-host the podcast, Life Writing, Write for Your Life. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer, Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She and her husband live with their son, Jason. Welcome to Tananarive.
Hey, excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, we are super excited to have you here.
It's been a year.
Oh my God, yes.
That means so much. So few words that mean so much, and different things to everybody. But
Yeah.
in this particular case, I'm talking about my book, The Reformatory, because it has been a year. I mean, yeah, I'm kind of stunned. I just saw an article today that it was nominated for a Dragon Award at DragonCon, which is a first.
Yes.
Congrats.
That's a first for me. And it's just amazing. I'm pinching myself every day.
It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I just love the history that you put into your books, and especially this one. It really came through in this one. I interviewed you, about 5 years ago. It was before COVID. Let's just say that. It was in the before times.
Yes.
I'm curious about your connection to history and why you like to include it in your stories, and also your research process.
Wow, that is a great question. And it's funny because I remember like a million years ago, literally, well, not quite literally, my previous agent, who has since passed away, brought me into a project called The Black Rose with the Alex Haley estate, which was a novel about Madam C.J. Walker, who was reputed to be the first Black female millionaire. And I was like, why are you bringing this to me? I'm not a historical writer. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, you had historical chapters in your novel, My Soul to Keep, and those were pretty good. Mm-hmm. So I think you ought to give this a try. And I have to tell you, I have been hooked ever since. And, you talk about research, that process of working with the notes of Alex Haley and seeing how he basically cataloged major current events year by year, like the kinds of things people would have been talking about. So I learned a lot about process of writing historical just by putting eyeballs on the research he compiled on this book with the great-granddaughter, I think it's the great-great-granddaughter, actually, of Madam C.J. Walker, Alelia Bundles. So that kind of speaks to some of the research piece. But I didn't know I loved it until I loved it. And pretty much since then, it's been Joplin's Ghost, which is, ragtime performer Scott Joplin, and a twin story in contemporary time is basically to show the more things change, the more they stay the same in the music industry, but with ghosts. Mm-hmm. And The Reformatory is kind of a similar concept. It is a snapshot to me, honestly, having co-written that memoir with my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, and hearing about her childhood in the 1950s in rural Florida, that opportunity to really try to anchor a reader in her time. I don't know. It's just so weird to me because when we think about history, it's just graveyard upon graveyard upon graveyard. So many people who are gone. I sometimes think, wow, if I could go back 100 years, I'll know I would never do that. And thank God I can't do that. But if I were to do that, there are like so many people I could find to be my friends. You know what I mean? Like such cool people, smart people, creative people, people who love music just like I do. Generation after generation after generation produces this entire universe of people that then just die. And then we start over again, right? And I want to like anchor and like, look, this was my parents' coming of age time of life. 1950, Florida was where my mother grew up. And even though the Reformatory is very loosely based, or I should say inspired more than based on what happened to my great uncle, my mother's uncle, a real person named Robert Stevens, actually died at the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida in 1937. And almost like from the minute I visited that facility and I was there for the start of exhumations, the University of South Florida, Aaron Kimmerly is the researcher who was guiding this project to try to just see how many people were even buried on the grounds. Like they just had random burial spots that were unmarked. I don't think people even get when you see the photographs, there's all these little crosses. No, those crosses were not put there by the Dozier School. That was a Boy Scout troop doing his best to guess where maybe the bodies were. But just a horrific scenario. And we can talk about the specifics of the Dozier School more, but just to try to keep myself focused. The minute I heard about this place and had an opportunity to talk to survivors, both black and white, and just in one meeting, I mean, their memories of this whipping shed that they called the White House, which is what's pictured on the front of the book. I call it the Fun House. Just to make it even more insidious than it actually was, is I give it like a name that's supposed to be a fun name. But it was insidious enough, honestly. They called it the White House. And it seemed like everybody went through this place. It was very, like the infractions were so hard to avoid. Like as someone told me after I published the book, who was there literally at the time that I set my novel in 1950. I wish I had been able to talk to him before I wrote it. But that would have just made it even worse because the infractions were so terrible. Like if you step off the sidewalk, you might get sent to the whipping shed. Or if you cried out at a certain point, they'd start over again with the lashes. I was like, holy cow, what a hellish place this was. And I knew I wanted to write about it in some way, flirted with the idea of nonfiction because I had done a memoir with my mother. But, honestly, I don't like writing nonfiction. I was a journalist for 10 years. I love journalists. There's a special place in heaven for journalists, but it's not who I am. I'm a novelist, and nonfiction feels more like writing with my left hand, and I'm right-handed. So once there's that, and there's also, it's a sucky story, honestly. I mean, a kid gets sent to the reformatory and dies. That is not like my vibe as a writer. So I wanted to honor the fact that Robert Stevens existed and had been erased, not just from overall history, but from his own family history. I didn't know about him until the state of Florida called me. I've met someone who was a namesake of his. He didn't know who he was. I think it just tore a hole on my grandfather's side of the family. And it was paved over, as a lot of trauma gets paved over. And I wanted to use a historical novel as a way not just to talk about the injustice of this horrible place, and not just as a way to kind of create a funhouse mirror so that people dealing with similar issues now, because a lot of Black and brown families today have to contend with their kids getting sent to juvenile hall. The school to prison pipeline is a very real thing. Students get criminalized for truancy, and then enough truancies, and then you're referred to the police department. And then, there's a whole system to shuttle our children into the criminal justice system. And I wanted it to be a through the funhouse primer for parents, although if you read the book, obviously the solution my characters came to is not always possible. Or ever possible, but just so they wouldn't feel more alone, so they would feel more seen, so people would understand. Again, like with Joplin's Ghost, the more things change, the more they stay the same. adding ghosts to make it less traumatic a read, frankly, because having people who died previously saves me from having to depict death after death after death in my novel. But also, honestly, I think maybe the prevailing thing I wanted to do was to make history the monster in this book, to make Jim, and that was the hardest part, honestly, of writing it, aside from the memoirs and hearing about the abuse that children suffered at the Dozier School. It was having to be in 1950, like literally just having to exist. Because when I write, I really parachute into my books, and I write with a very close third person point of view. I'm experiencing the story along with my characters. And being in 1950, aside from just being at the Reformatory, but literally being anywhere in 1950 was really, really hard for me.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of things I want to say here. First, I want to jump back a minute, Doug. I used to be a teacher, and I taught in the inner city in Pittsburgh. And I'll never forget, this one kid came in after school. He had a job at a grocery store, right? And you know, when you're working at a grocery store, I worked at a grocery store when I was a teenager. You know, they give you a box cutter, right? And you have to bring it to work. It's your box cutter, and you use it to cut the boxes, and you know, throw them out back in the compressor thing. Well, he had forgotten it was in his back pocket. Okay. And he walked in, and it went off through the metal detector, and they grabbed him, you know, and they basically, I guess they basically arrested him, more or less, you know, like the school police came and got him. And I had to write a letter to the judge as this kid's teacher to say, hey, look, this was an honest mistake. I know this kid, you know, like he is just trying to make money. His family doesn't have a lot, you know what I mean? And all this whole thing, so that they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't send him away. Well, they didn't listen to me, and they sent him away anyway.
Are you serious?
Yeah, totally serious.
For how long?
Gosh, how long was he? 6 months, I think.
Oh my God, for accidentally bringing a bike. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of ways, for a lot of families, they are no better off in fact, some of them are worse off in their interactions with police and with the criminal justice system, because it's become highly militarized on the street level and highly commodified, just on the sort of meta level. You know, there's like a whole system that it has to uphold. There's bail bondsmen, there's attorneys, you know. So one of the small town sheriffs, well, I only interviewed one small town sheriff when I was writing this in Quincy, Florida, where my mom grew up, was one of these outspoken and active sheriffs who tried to reduce recidivism and had all these programs to help people, because 50% of the Black men in his county were going through the jail system. And he was like, hey, we got to put a stop to this. And he got in trouble. He got in trouble for bringing the numbers down in his jail. And surprising, not you, I see, but that's the thing. What a terrible injustice to that child. And what a terrible trauma for that family to go to. You're just as helpless today. If the police knock on your door and want to take your child away in chains and put them in a cage, you are just as helpless today as families were in 1950. And that's the sad part. And there are more children incarcerated than there were in 1950.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking back to it, it was a semester. I remember that, because when he got out of school, then he was allowed to leave. Like, it was the second half of the year, if I recall correctly. So, but yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you just said. 100%.
My heart just aches for that situation. Yeah. And I know that he was not alone.
No.
And I mean, oh my gosh, just,
No.
Thanks for sharing that. No, I'm kidding.
Make everyone depressed.
It's very depressing.
Yeah.
Very depressing. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Everywhere I turned working on this book, because I did read a book about our contemporary criminal justice system called Burning Down the House and Into Juvenile Prison by Nell Bernstein, where I learned, you know, that most children, minors who are incarcerated and end up sexually assaulted, content warning to talk about sexual assault, are not assaulted by other prisoners. They're assaulted by the guards. And this just speaks to that weird phenomenon, that human phenomenon where people in power abuse the powerless. Because people say, oh no, how could people abuse children? It's like, of course they're going to abuse that because they're powerless. they're the perfect victims. And not everybody turns into an abuser, but you remember, was it the Stanford study about when you artificially assign people the label jailer and prisoner, psychologically, the jailers turn into bullies.
Yeah.
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 To bring it back to your book, you know, I do think you did a great job kind of lightening the topic somewhat, because you're right. I mean, especially as a parent, like I'm reading through this, like how could people do that? Like I could never do that. I worked with kids. Did I get pissed off at kids sometimes? Oh yeah, definitely. Were there specific kids that I dreaded having in class? Oh yeah, absolutely. Did I ever beat them or anything? Did I ever want to? No, definitely not. You know what I mean? Like it's
No.
but you did a great job lightening it up. There was never a point in this book where I was like, "Oh my God, I just can't go on." You know what I mean? It's just too much.
You know, I'm a little bit of a hypocrite in the sense that, like, I love Stephen King, of course, it goes without saying, but one of his novels that I did not read was I think it was called The Institute.
Yeah.
Which was basically about incarcerated children. Basically, to me, and I haven't read it, and I could be wrong. Oh my God, a 12-year-old. See, to me, The Institute sounded like it was going to be like reading Dr. Sleep, but if the child had been captured, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
and I was like, I can't do it. So I get it when people say, "Oh, I wanted to read your book, but I couldn't." Just on like the plot line, like, oh, that sounds rough. And I admit the plot line does sound rough, but in the book's defense, I will say this. In order for me to make it palatable for readers, I really had to strain out a lot of toxicity. There were real life stories I could have put in the novel that I just couldn't bear to weigh my readers down with knowing. Like, I'm kind of sad I know about your student now. You know what I mean? Like, it just adds more sadness to my life. So I tried not to overwhelm readers with that. I tried to make most of the violence in the past so that the ghosts are an honest representation of how violent the place is without having to immerse myself in that violence. And on top of that, the thing that I'm happiest about, I hear from readers, is that they say it gives a sense of hope.
Yes.
Because that's the thing. Like, if I had missed that, I would have been I needed that. I needed that sense of hope. And that's one of the reasons that child protagonists are so amazing, is that I always felt like while I was writing it, basically the plot, by the way, is, I should tell readers, I guess everyone hasn't read it, a 12-year-old boy, basically the same as in The Institute, now that I'm looking up that information. A 12-year-old boy gets sentenced to 6 months in a Jim Crow segregated reformatory for basically a schoolyard kick against a very rich white teenager who's way bigger than him. He's a football player. It doesn't matter. The power structure is what it is. Very similar injustice is what happened to your student. He gets sentenced to 6 months. But this place is like a concentration camp hellhole. I mean, it's forced labor. It's you might not come home, that kind of situation. A little bit different than, thankfully, what inmates go through today at juvenile facilities in terms of the death rate, I would imagine, was much higher than the national average, I would hope. And so that's his story, and realizing that ghosts are real, but that also ghosts are not his biggest problem and his biggest fear. And his sister, twin storylines, where his 17-year-old sister, Gloria, who is modeled on my late mother, her middle name was Gloria. So it's like having my mother, who was a civil rights activist and basically became an activist in high school. So it'd be like, what if she had a brother that this had happened to when their father had been chased out of town on a trumped up false allegation? What would she do? And every turn, it was like, what would you do in this situation? How do you fix it? So there was this propulsive, like the thing that drove me through the long slog, 7 years I spent on this book. It's the longest I have spent writing anything. And it took 7 years because of the research, because the research was so difficult, mostly avoiding it, to be honest. I mean, I didn't spend 7 years actually writing it. I spent 7 years talking about writing it here and there. But it was that just knowing that research. So I wanted the ending. The ending was the thing I was writing toward. I could see it in my mind, in my memories, and I'm not going to give away the ending, but Cicely Tyson was going to play the part of a woman named Ms. Lottie, who's named after my grandmother. And I could see a scene with Cicely Tyson. That was my North Star. Like, I need to write to, like, I got so, and there were so many times I wanted to give up on this book. I wanted to give up on it when I heard that Colson Whitehead was going to publish The Nickel Boys, which was set at a fictionalized version of the same institution. I'd been working on it maybe 2 or 3 years when that book was announced or when it came out. So I was like, oh, that was disheartening. I love him. It's like, oh my God, that's going to like get a lot of attention. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And it did. It won a Pulitzer Prize. You can hardly get more attention than that. But my agent talked me into continuing. And I have to say, I am so grateful that there really was enough bandwidth in the literary world for the Reformatory to exist alongside a book like The Nickel Boys, because, for different reasons, different stories, different writers, but also mine has ghosts. Thank God his doesn't, because, man, I dodged a bullet. He could, he did magical realism in Underground Railroad. So
Yeah.
I didn't know at first. And he tweeted me, "No ghosts, my friend." I was like, oh, thank God. Because I tell you, I probably wouldn't have finished it. I'll be honest. I probably would not have finished it if he had been writing a ghost story too.
I was curious, when you're finding inspiration in historical stories, is there something about a particular story that you hear it and you're just like, oh yeah, I want to write about that? Or does it sort of grow on you over time?
It's both things. There are definitely moments in the book that are inspired by real things I came across in my research. Although I'll change the situation and the facts. And so, yes, in fact, that's one of the reasons, like I'm working on a book now called Bear Creek Lodge that involves research that's both historical and, sort of a spoonful of science. And because it's a creature story, right? And part of me wants to just sort of write ahead past the hole in my because I ran into a research hole yesterday. I was like, oh, I literally don't know what this man is thinking because I don't know anything about his field. So I thought, I could skip this chapter. I could write the next chapter about the characters I already know. But I have this superstition because sometimes you come across something in research that is so mind-blowing that it changes the trajectory of your story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't want to over-revere the research process because it can be a place you get lost and literally get lost for years. Like I actually don't advise authors to spend that much time on research until they run into that wall. And that wall, which sometimes feels like writer's block, in this case was literally, I was ready to write. I was going to do a quota. Like I like to read what I wrote that day in the evening for fun, but I couldn't write because of the research hole. And that's when, you got to stop, for me anyway, do the research. But in terms of just the broader aspect of it, reading books set in the time, I read James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. I had never read To Kill a Mockingbird. I had never read it.
Oh, wow.
So I read that, which was awesome, by the way. I mean, I understand why schools feel like it's telling a Black story from the outside in, and there's like a movement to like replace it or supplement it. And frankly, while I was working on the Reformatory, I thought, okay, well, people who grew up reading To Kill a Mockingbird will understand the Reformatory. They get this setting, this scenario, and that's a good thing, But the immersion process of feeling like you're walking through 1950 when you weren't alive during that time, for me, it means reading a whole lot of stuff, fiction, nonfiction, so that when I close my eyes and I'm on that McCormick Road, I can see the cars passing. I can see, I can hear the way people talk. I can see the way Sears catalogs. I mean, there's a whole slew of things I use. The music of the era, whatever it takes, like just to feel like I'm walking there. That's the broader research. But yeah, there are some independent, like just little nuggets that you learn along the way. Oh, like one, I'll give you a great example of a historical nugget. This was accidental discovery that I just found in social media. In the turn of the century, Victorian era, you guys might know this, there wasn't a lot of photography. So often if you see a family portrait, it means that somebody died. And they would pose with the body. This was just a common practice. This might be the only time they ever sat for a family photo, would be like a funeral pose. And that just inspired me so much. Like, oh my God, what if the warden has this photo in his office and Robert will notice it? Like, because it just looks like a family photo, but Robert is very observant. And Robert's looking at this photo and he's noticing that everybody else looks so grim and hollow-eyed, except for the boy who's holding the dead baby on his lap. And that boy is smiling. Yeah. Because that little sociopath or psychopath, I forget which he is, killed his baby sister. Like, he could almost just see it in the picture. And that's the kind of specific research detail that, had I not come across it, like to me, it's more of a grace note than something that turns the plot. Mm-hmm. But I love those nuggets. I love finding those little grace notes that are not just sort of background to help me see where I am, but will like, oh shoot, this is an important thing. I can really hang the ending of the scene on this picture.
That's awesome.
I did love that detail. That was actually one of the creepier details, in my opinion. Every time he looked at it, I was like, oh, so weird.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like being creepy.
Your research whole comment made me think of something. Have you both seen Loki, the TV show?
Yes.
And spoilers for Loki if you have not seen it. So skip 30 seconds or something. But that episode, it's like the second to last episode or something. And he's like, so how long would it take me to learn all the engineering and all the physics that you guys know? And they're like, I don't know, a century. And then it's like a century later.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And he's like running around telling everybody what to do. Okay, now you got to do this thing. You got to do this thing. And for listeners, if you haven't seen
that's sort of what it felt like.
Yes, it's exactly like that. Okay, it's going to take me a century. Okay, let's do this.
Exactly. That's pretty much it. Although, honestly, if I had known it was going to take so long to write the book. But now I've learned from that mistake. And I'll tell you the mistakes I made that made it take me so long to write this book. I let every other project with a deadline take priority over it. Because I had not set a deadline. My agent is Donald Moss, and he gave me a great idea for the twist in the book, which I won't say what it is, but if you've read it, you know what it is. There's a twist that has to do with the ghosts. I'll just put it that way. That was his idea. That's a beautiful idea. I love that idea. And he thought, rather than try to sell it before I wrote it, and we talked, is it YA? We decided, no, we don't think it's quite YA. He's like, look, finish it, then we'll sell it. So that meant no deadline. And not having a deadline, that meant anybody else that wanted me to do, like, it could be a 500-word essay. It could be a script. And frankly, any excuse not to be working on it, That's what it was. That was so now I've like almost gone the opposite direction. It's like I am blowing deadlines right and left for other people because I'm trying to write this book faster. I want to it's there. Yeah. I've been piecing it together for some time now because my current novel really was inspired by my short story that won a World Fantasy Award last year, which was Incident at Bear Creek Lodge, which is a coming-of-age story about a young boy who visits his aging grandmother in the woods, and there's some kind of creature on the property, and he finds out that she's abusive. Look, I'm not, it's kind of a spoilery summary, but I think it's important to understand. So the novel version, that's his backstory. And most of the novel takes place when he's an adult, but also his grandmother as a child is a character. So I'm really kind of unpacking this premise to show the intergenerational trauma of Black artists who have tried to make a living in Hollywood, with the creature story as kind of a metaphor for that trauma, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I am I'm researching old Hollywood. I'm watching movies. I watched The Jazz Singer for the first time. I had never seen The Jazz Singer. Nosferatu
Nice.
for the first time. I had never seen that. Some early Oscar Michaud. Like, I'm giving myself a film studies course to try to make the 1920s and the 1930s and 40s come to life for me the way 1950 did in the Reformatory, but I'm doing it fast. Like, I am racing through these books. I am racing through these documentaries. And like I said, I am blowing a bunch of other little deadlines because my novel is first right now. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A less serious question. I am kind of curious where the idea for the ghost dust came from.
Goofer dust is a real thing. I'm not going to pretend I'm a real expert on it. I did a lot of research into really traditional Vodou when I wrote The Good House, like the Haitian Vodou and people who are practitioners of those West African based religions, the Loas and the, gods and all this. I really took that seriously. In this book, not so much. So there's something called goofer dust, which is sort of hoodoo, and hoodoo is kind of a bastardized, Southern American kind of version of what maybe people thought Vodou is, to do spells and stuff, love potions, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So goofer dust is real. Like, it usually is from a grave or whatever, but the specific use for the haint dust I have in the Reformatory, I as far as I know, I just made it up. And the premise is, and I don't think this is too spoilery, but if it is, you can cut it out. The warden is so evil that not only has he been responsible either personally or indirectly for the deaths of so many children over the years, but he literally is also hunting down their ghosts. And this haint dust, this goofer dust, is like the catnip for ghosts. It's like an irresistible scent to them. And when he realizes that Robert has a talent for seeing ghosts, he wants to enlist him as a haint catcher, which is the last thing Robert wants to be. I mean, when he was sent to the Reformatory, the social worker said, "Be invisible."
Yeah.
You don't want to bring notice to yourself. And it's like the total opposite thing happens to poor Robert.
Yeah.
That was definitely a part to that book where I'm like, no, stop. What? Why are you making these decisions? You're doing the opposite what they told you to do. Oh.
He's 12. But the thing that's great, and I forgot to say this earlier, the thing that's great about a child protagonist is that they do have that flexibility and adaptability. Not that they wouldn't need therapy and don't need therapy, but I honestly believe that were I in his situation, like if I had been arrested and put in this dormitory, like the first night, I wouldn't have slept a wink that first night. Like, he dealt with it so much better. A whipping, he dealt with it so much better than I would have as an adult. And I think it's that, and that's the thing I love about child protagonists. That's why in horror, I cannot stand it when people gaslight children.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I often say, I don't care if my son was 3. If he said there's a noise in the closet, there's a noise under the bed, I'm going to be there with a flashlight and a weapon. You know what I mean? Like, I am listening.
Yeah.
In fact, my son and I did have an uncanny experience once together where we both heard something weird. But they are the most sensitive. They are the most embracing of reality when it kind of hairs away from what we expect. You know what I mean? Like, adults are very good with routine and the expected. But if it's not routine, if it's not expected, it's the kids who figure it out first. Like, if you give a 5-year-old an iPhone, they will figure it out faster than your grandmother. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because your grandmother has to compare every other phone she's ever tried to use to this crazy looking device. And the 5-year-old is like, oh, phone. That's it. So it's like, oh, ghost. Oh, demon. I mean, you better listen.
Yeah.
And also the absolute audacious imagination and hope that kids have. Like, they believe in freaking Santa Claus. Like, yeah, they can dream big. And I think it's Robert's big dreams, his optimism, that was his superpower in the Reformatory. And I think that's a big reason people feel like it's a hopeful story, because it's not a story about a kid who's just sort of crying himself to sleep every night. This is a story about a kid making some plans.
Yeah, for sure. And you do a good job of like bringing a community of characters to the story too. You kind of throw that whole hero's journey thing out the window, right? Because while Robert's like mostly the main character, you also have Gloria. You also have their I forget, was she their great aunt or and then her
Yeah,
son.
like a godmother.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you have this whole host of characters and they kind of all work together, right? To solve the problems.
Yes. Yes. Well, I wanted, yes, community is also a character in the story. And I wanted that community to also be interracial, because that was my mother's experience during the civil rights movement in the 60s, certainly. But also, I would imagine at times during her childhood, I'm sure under segregation in Florida during her childhood, she didn't come in contact with a lot of white people. So it's very possible that Gloria is coming in contact with white people way more than my mother did. But the white people in their lives, one is an employer, the social worker. I really, 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 even with the warden, who is the most evil character I've probably ever written, I didn't want anybody to be cartoonish. And I didn't want it to be like, Black people good, white people bad, you know, because that's not the world either. So there were allies who were Black and enemies who were Black. There were allies who were white and enemies who were white. And I think the main thing I wanted white readers to take away from the book was to sort of to consider at least some of the limitations of allyship in practice, right? Because I have examples of allyship, people giving money, people giving advice, even giving your phone number in this situation is an act of allyship. I mean, you know, you could look at some of these characters and say, why didn't they do more? And to me, the answer was because white supremacy and Jim Crow in the 1950s were upheld with violence. That's why, just like slavery was upheld with violence. And violence also means, just today, it means the same thing today it meant in 1950. Even if you're a white person, if you are in a situation, say like a Black Lives Matter protest, where you have allied yourself with Black people, sometimes that rancor will be as bad. Or in the South, sometimes it was worse. Sometimes because it was like, they would look at Black people like, well, they don't know any better. But you're a traitor. I'm not saying that's how it always was, but that was the thinking because they didn't even think Black people had intelligence enough to realize that they needed to agitate for change. So it was almost like, you know, a cow or a horse is dissatisfied. They're not getting enough feed, but the white college students coming in, I'm going to teach y'all a lesson. And we see that same thing today with Heather Heyer and her getting run down during a Black Lives Matter protest. You know, on the one hand, white womanhood is supposed to be the thing everyone is protecting, but not if you're a Black Lives Matter protester. And so that was, there's even the allies, whether they're queer and they're hiding, or they have money and influence, or they're just trying to keep their heads down because their own families are in danger. I wanted to show examples of allyship, but also the limitations of allyship when set against such a violent background.
I love all of that. I definitely had some reactions to that, and I really did appreciate that, the integration between the white people and the Black folks and how that all worked together. You know what I mean? It just, reading your book, I actively sat there and thought about some of that stuff, you know? So you did a good job, I think.
Thank you. That's what I really wanted to like. There was one little section I ended up cutting out of the book because I had a scene where the social worker has taken an action. I'm not going to give too much away. It's a small action in the scheme of things, but actually it's a big action. And it's a catalyst for a lot of things that will happen later. And after he does that action, I had him sitting in his office, like gathering his courage, by God, I'm not going to stand here and be paralyzed with fear. I'm going to make a difference. And then the whole rest of the book passed, and I never came back to him. I'm like, well, I can't have him making this huge proclamation for action, and then he doesn't ever do it. So I actually cut it out because it wasn't needed, and he had already done his little thing. But also, it was not going to be his story. And that was the one thing about this that I fought at every turn. You know, people, when we were developing it for TV, as I was for about 3 years, we were like thinking about, like, do we create a role for the father and make him a bigger character to attract an actor to the role, which, you know, makes sense on a TV sale level, but on a story level, this was always supposed to be Robert and Gloria. These two siblings are figuring it out, like in young adult fiction. It's like the kids are the point. The kids are the catalyst for change. The kids are the ones who make all the most important decisions. And that was really important to me.
I'm really interested in this, partially because one of the things I've become aware of in recent years is how much horror fiction showcases social problems. And I have a question in there somewhere, and I'm just not quite sure where to go with it.
Well, I'll finish your thought for you, Darky.
Yeah,
But I mean, I what you're saying, I mean, horror is such a powerful way to talk about social problems. And I mean, done right, you know, and there is a distinction. I really do feel we went through a stage, especially right after Get Out, when everyone was scrambling to try to come up with their version of that story and use horror as a way to talk about social issues, where we saw, especially in Black horror, some images of lynching as horror. And I'm not going to get specific. I have some projects in mind, but I'm not going to get specific. And that, to me, I think is missing an important point, which is that people who are concerned about these things, people who've had this happen in their family history, like I was at a screening for Horror Noir in Indianapolis last year. And in that brief screening, there was a flash of real life, a real life lynching, a photograph of a real life lynching. And it just flashes across the screen very briefly. But one of the panelists on the stage with me said, you know, I just want to mention that man who was being lynched, he was in my family.
Oh, God.
So for people who have either a very visceral and personal relationship with that history, or it's just kind of been passed down generation by generation, you know, not the specific stories, but you feel the trauma in the air. We don't want lynching as horror to be re-traumatized. We want something that helps us leach out the trauma from that. So you do it through the looking glass. You do it sideways, you know, which was why Get Out works so well, because this science fiction body snatching operation is not real. Okay. Yeah. Nobody is like, oh my God, that happened to my grandmother. No, that is not real. So the not real is what gives us the room to absorb the healing power of feeling seen, like having an experience validated. I think that's why my late mother loved horror. Yeah. She was a civil rights activist, and I used to think it was a bug that she loved horror, but it's a feature. It's a feature. Yes, of course she loved horror. Her childhood was a horror. Her young adulthood was a horror. So, of course, watching people stand up to demons and monsters, or even maybe she was identifying with the Frankenstein monster, right? Or whatever. It can be healing, but it has to be done with care. And I really feel like too many newer artists who are trying to jump into the horror game miss the point. I don't want to be re-traumatized. I want to be healed.
Clearly, you know, influencing the world out there towards the better, right, is important to you. It's been important to your family, back to civil rights, right? How do you feel fiction can help influence the world in that direction?
That's a great question. And that was my question, because growing up raised by a civil rights attorney and a mother who is a civil rights activist, who was in my history books and my index pages, you know, when I was in college, I think it was daunting to me because both of my sisters went to law school, by the way. I was the only one who didn't go to law school. And I really kind of felt like a loser in that sense, you know, like I've always wanted to be a writer. I was writing when I was 4. And I even asked my mother at one level, was it a waste of time? And I remember her telling me that the NAACP invested a lot of resources into the Beverly Hills Hollywood branch in the 1960s because they understood the power of representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, thank God, because yeah, I want to represent, but I don't want to represent like you represent or the way my dad represents, but through storytelling, which is a little more dicey. It's kind of a side door. There's no literal call to action in the Reformatory, although one reviewer said it read like a call to action. And that means it's up to every individual reader or viewer to decide what their call to action is. And they may not even know that it's directly related to that thing they just wrote or read or saw. It's just my mindset has been affected by what I've experienced here. So the next time I hear a story about a police officer killing someone, or the next time I hear a story about a young person sent to juvenile hall over some bullshit, I might write a letter. I might make a phone call. I might join Big Brothers Big Sisters. It's so I believe it can have a true and lasting impact because actually the book or the work will outlast you. Hopefully it will outlive you. People you will never meet, people who will be reading it after you're gone will still be hopefully changed by it and thereby find their own way to engage with creating change. And, I'll just say this, knowing my parents' generation of activists, sometimes that change is just in your own house because that generation sacrificed their families for the movement. Not my parents, because my mother basically really stepped back from a lot of her more public activism when she had kids. And she became an activist at the PTA meetings and an activist with the teacher meetings. And that is a form of change too. When we eliminate trauma in our own households, or at least minimize it. You can't eliminate it, but when you minimize trauma in our own households, we are creating a better world as much as maybe sometimes more so than people who are very vocally out in the world trying to create change. There's room for everybody. Change looks many different ways. And that was another lesson from the civil rights era. There were people like my mother getting arrested in tear gas, and there were people like the white banker who were sneaking after hours to hand them an envelope of money. And both of those things are very important.
Wow. I love so much of what you said there. Unfortunately, we are coming up on time, so we gotta hit the end of the interview questions. Man, you just said so much stuff there. I love when you said minimizing trauma is a form of activism. That actually means a lot to me personally. So I really appreciate that. So what is bringing you hope right now?
Well, the political landscape is looking a lot brighter than it did a few weeks ago. So I hadn't realized the degree to which I was kind of clenched up and had my head in the sand. Like, well, we'll figure it out. We'll do it. And now it's more like, oh my, people are like, was this what it was like under Kennedy or when Kennedy was running? And I'm like, okay, let's not get carried away. I don't know what it was like when Kennedy was running, but it reminds me a lot of 2008. I'll tell you that. And I'm very, very excited for younger voters because, I'm a lifelong Democrat. And of course, I'm thrilled with this ticket of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But I don't think I will ever again feel what I felt the first time I saw Bill Clinton play a saxophone on Arsenio. And I thought, oh my God, he gets it. You know what I mean? Or when I saw Barack Obama make his red states and blue states speech at the Democratic National Convention for Kerry. And then the night he won Iowa, Iowa. Like that was the night when Barack Obama won Iowa. That was when I realized, oh my God, he could do. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And, time passes. And I don't know if I'm in a position to fall in love with politicians the way I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
But this is as close as it gets for me right now. I could be, I woke up in tears over a vice presidential pick. When I woke up in tears over a vice presidential pick because I realized, oh my God, they're serious about winning.
Yeah.
They're serious about winning.
Yeah.
And that moved me to tears because that was when I could let the fear in. That was what I could let the fear. I mean, not that anything is guaranteed, but I honestly, I don't think there's anything more important, whether you're an artist or whoever you are, than making sure that we don't usher fascism into the White House this year.
Yes.
Yes.
And that means winning this election. And, if people feel like they can't vote, well, then do something else. Get all your friends to vote, because this is not a drill. This is not about like an old corrupt criminal rapist with dementia.
Mm-hmm.
This is about an entire system that is trying to ride in on him, like his basically almost his remains at this point, frankly. And that system has shown its hand, what it's willing to do, and we have to expect that it is more organized and it is willing to do more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what gives me hope is that young people are excited and engaged in this election in a way they were not 3 weeks ago, and thank God for it.
As soon as the pick was announced, I have a group chat with some of my friends, and they were all talking about it, and I'm like, thank God the Dems are not shooting themselves in the foot again, because I feel like every other time they're just like, oh, there's my foot, bam, okay.
The most cynical decision, the most like, how about you do what like people are like screaming for you to do? Your base wants, you know what I mean? Like, do that.
Yes.
Listen to, and I think for a lot of people, like hearing Walls make the joke about the couch, I was telling Steve about this, and no, I don't think I don't think JD Vance had sex with a couch. Okay. But it's funny. And considering the kind of like whole scale trolling that this party has been doing against us, birtherism, the coup, come on, it's a little, but the fact that he made the joke, there are a lot of Gen Zers out there, because that's an internet meme.
Yeah.
So for him to make an internet meme a part of his first speech to the country, that is signaling them like that was Bill Clinton on the saxophone. He gets us. And that first moment you feel seen by the political structure, that is incredible. There's no feeling like it. Like you really feel like, oh my God, we're here. We finally made it. We can have a role in changing this country. And so I'm just loving the excitement from the youth.
Yeah, me too. I think it'll be a very exciting time if Kamala Harris gets in. That'll just be.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm talking my big talk now, but I would probably be like crying like a baby on election night.
Totally fair. Totally fair, I think. I think a lot of people will be, even if it's not outwardly, they'll be internally crying with relief.
Yeah, just sobbing with relief. Like, thank you, USA. You've got your issues. There's a lot of work to do, but at least we were able to finally figure out how to put a stop to this particular form of menace.
Yeah.
I hope. I mean, it ain't over till it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knock on wood.
Totally. So, are there any upcoming projects that you want to talk about?
Well, I am busily working on my next novel, which I believe is not till 2026, called Bear Creek Lodge. I'm part of a project called the Horizon Experiment, which is comics. And I've written an upcoming comic called Moondogs, which I believe goes on sale later this year. So people can check that out. We did another graphic novel, The Keeper, that was adapted from a screenplay, actually. But I'm actually trying to delve a little bit. I get my fingertips into comics, and some short stories coming up. I just wrote one for Uncanny I'm really excited about, called A Stranger Knocks. So hopefully that'll be out soon.
Awesome.
Nice.
Awesome. And then where can everyone find you online?
I am literally everywhere. When Twitter blew up, I joined. I'm still there, by the way, and I refuse to call it X, so I'm still there. I always use my real name, at Tananarive Due. So I am at Tananarive Due. I even joined TikTok. I mean, all of them. Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and my website is tananarivedue.com. And also, people can join my mailing list at tananarivelist.com. It's like banana. Rive, R-I-V-E, list.com, which has links to weekly Zooms. I mean, I don't think enough people know that Steve and I do free weekly Zooms where we just talk to people about balanced lifestyle and writing. So come check us out on our weekly Saturday Zooms. Join my list at tananarivelist.com.
All right. Well, that's everything for me. Kat, do you have anything else?
No, but it's been just absolutely a delight having you on.
Oh, well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciated the questions and the company. So thank you very much.
All right. And that was our interview with Tananarive Due. Thoughts, Kat?
That was amazing.
Yes. Yes. I loved everything that she had to say. I connected with so many of the things that she had to say. And
Yeah.
also, she was super easy to interview. I feel like we didn't really have to work very hard.
No, she's been interviewing for a long time. She knows her stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Very clearly. And I appreciate that. I love that, because I get worried about it sometimes, what if
Oh yeah.
this person doesn't talk enough? What if they're quiet? We get those every now and then, not a ton, but every now and then,
Well, we do. It's sort of like when you're teaching, like I've had this happen and you get kind of like get all the way through your material and you're like, oh shit, I still have X number of minutes to go. And like,
Yes. Yes, I have totally got there. And also, she said, I don't think J.D. Vance had sex with his couch, which I thought was hilarious.
yes.
So she said that here. Everyone just remember that.
It's good to have these things confirmed.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. So what are you reading right now? Anything fun?
Yeah, I just finished John Wiswell's Someone You Can Build a Nest In, which is just wonderful. And I'm about a third of a way into a YA book called Empire Wars by Akana Phoenix, which is kind of like a fantasy Hunger Games in some ways.
Oh, okay. Cool.
What about you?
Let's see. I'm in the middle of a book of short stories called One Eye Opened in That Other Place by Christy Nogle. Have you ever read any of her stuff?
No.
Oh boy. Definitely weird horror, weird fiction, whatever you want to call it. This is the second collection. No, wait, let me think about that. Yeah, no, this is the third in a set of 3 collections done by Flame Tree Press. I reviewed the second one. I'll be reviewing this one too. And the second one was more science fiction oriented. And man, I had no idea what to expect. And then I was like, oh my God, this is wild.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, just like totally weird, bizarro kind of stuff. I mean, and now that bizarro is kind of like this subcategory. I don't want to say like some of her stuff I might actually categorize there, but just weird, bizarre stuff that happens, and you're just trying to figure it out the whole time you're reading. Like, okay, what now? And very unsettling, horror kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And then I just started earlier today, The Day and Night Books of Mardu Fox by Nisi Shawl.
Oh, I haven't read those yet. So I'm sure you're enjoying them.
Yeah. So it's like, so far it is based on Jack Kerouac. In a couple of Jack Kerouac's books, he has a character named Mardu Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And this is from Mardu Fox's point of view.
Nice.
And it's definitely like, I can't even really tell you. I mean, they jump into like the fantasy aspects pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
But the one I have it's a novella, and it's even got like some hand drawings in it and stuff because it's written by like a 10-year-old. At least at the part that I'm at right now, she's 10, and it's like a diary kind of. But it's been interesting. It's been weird so far, and and this is put out by Rosarium Press, which is Bill Campbell, and I generally
Bill Campbell, yeah.
I usually love the stuff that he does. I don't often get time to review all of it or even a lot of it, but I try when I can, and I always love the stuff that Bill's doing. So I'm a big Jack Kerouac fan, or at least I was when I was in my 20s, which I think that's like the age for Jack Kerouac, right?
Oh, it is.
So the second I found out that, Nisi Shawl did like a fantasy based on Jack Kerouac, I was like, okay, I have to read that.
Yeah. I don't know how you could have resisted it.
Yeah, exactly. I have to push aside everything else for this. But so that's what I'm reading right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, good stuff. So I think that's it for today.
That's it. Well, it has been delightful.
Yes.
It is always so much fun to come on and interview such interesting people.
It is. It is. We've been getting so lucky lately. We're getting so many great people on here. It's been so fun.
We have.
So thanks to everybody for listening.
Take care, folks.
We are bringing hope to you one episode at a time. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey and produced by Ken Schrader. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Tananarive Due. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.